The roommate ad. In the tall silver towers of Norelia City, where every building hummed softly, and the streets were always clean and quiet, there lived a young alien girl named Lena who followed rules more closely than most in her district. Her days were simple, structured, and quiet, and she liked it that way. She was a careful planner, a soft speaker, and someone who always avoided problems. But life had recently changed for her. Her old roommate had left, suddenly called away for a job on another planet, and now Lena had to share her apartment again, not because she wanted company but because rent in the central zone was too expensive for one alone. So with a quiet sigh and a long pause, she typed out a roommate advertisement on the district net, simple and direct, stating only what was needed: one room available, peaceful building, quiet habits, preferred no pets, no noise, no mess. Lena did not expect any surprises. After all, her people, the Alari, were known for being reserved, clean and respectful. She assumed another Alari would respond and that life would return to her usual peaceful rhythm. But 2 days later she heard the doorbell chime, and when she opened the door, her entire world paused for a full 5 seconds. Humans stood there, not a quiet Alari, not one of the soft-eyed Fallon from across the district, not even a working bot, but a full-blooded, smiling backpack-carrying human male. He was tall compared to her, his skin a soft tan, and his eyes bright with curiosity and confidence. He looked around the hallway with interest, then gave a short wave with his free hand and said, "Hey, you must be Lena. I'm Jake. I saw the ad and figured I'd come check it out if that's all right." Lena stared, frozen, unsure if this was real or some kind of prank. Humans didn't live in this building. They didn't even live in this part of Norelia. Their presence was rare and often met with distrust and rumors. The last time she had seen a human in person was years ago during a council meeting, and even then they were surrounded by security and questions. "You re-human," she said flatly, her voice calm but her heart racing inside. Jake laughed a little. "Yeah, last I checked I am. Is that a problem?" She didn't answer right away, instead stepped aside slowly, unsure if she was breaking a rule just by letting him in her apartment. The building manual said nothing about species preferences, but unspoken rules were stronger in this city than written ones. The apartment was neat with pale walls and low shelves, a round sitting table in the middle, and a large window that looked over the blue glowing lake down below. Jake walked in with a whistle, looking around with a small smile. "Nice place, real clean, smells like mint or something." Lena closed the door behind him and folded her hands in front of her. This was not what she expected, not at all. She had questions, she had concerns, but something about Jake's calm, easy tone made her hesitate. Instead of asking all the things in her mind, she simply said, "You read the ad, you saw the conditions." He nodded. "Yep, no mess, no pets, and rent split fair. I'm good with all that. I work at the ship docks in the tech bay, early shifts mostly, and I'm quiet when I'm home, promise." And just like that, he sat down, his bag beside the couch, and waited as if this were already decided. Lena stared a moment longer, unsure if this was madness or something else. She didn't want chaos, she didn't want attention. But the idea of sending him away felt strange too. "1 week, she said finally, her voice even but firm. "1 week trial, and if there's any trouble, any complaints from neighbors, you leave." Jake gave a small salute and smiled. Deal. The next few days passed like watching a storm cloud hover overhead, unsure if it would bring rain or just pass. Jake was not what Lena expected. He was loud when he laughed. He cooked food that filled the air with strange spicy smells, and he played old earth music from a small device that hummed and sang in languages she didn't understand. But he also fixed things quietly when no one asked her. Table leg had been loose for weeks, and suddenly one morning, it was solid again, her light panel that flickered at night stopped flickering after he spent a quiet hour working with wires and a tool set he never showed off or asked for thanks. He just did things and moved on. Still, the stares from neighbors were getting longer, more whispers, more quiet hallway silences. When Jake walked by, Lena felt it in the air. The judgment, the unease. Her own family sent a message asking about the roommate situation. A coded way of saying they heard rumors. She didn't respond on the fifth day. She came home to find Jake in the small common room, sitting with a metal box open in front of him, small wires and chips scattered. As he focused on a broken service bot, he looked up. When she entered, gave a nod, then returned to his work, the soft light of evening casting golden patterns on the floor. "You fix machines for work?" she asked, standing nearby. Jake didn't look up. "I fix things because I like them working, because most people give up on stuff too fast," he shrugged gently. "This bot's got a burned circuit, but its legs are fine. People throw it out just for that. Seems like a waste to." Melina sat down across from him, not sure what to say. No. Ilari, she knew, spoke like this or acted like this, and for a moment, watching him so focused, so calm, she felt something shift inside. A thought, small but growing, that maybe humans weren't just stories of trouble and heat and mess. Maybe they were something else too. She didn't speak much that evening, but the silence between them was not uncomfortable. And when she went to her room later that night, she found her door panel fixed, the soft buzz gone, the edges smooth again, and she smiled. Just a little before going to sleep, outside the building on the far side of the street, a tall figure watched from a parked patrol drone, eyes scanning a small screen that showed apartment activity, the file open on Jake's name, marked with a yellow flag indicating species. Alert level low, but still under observation. Back in the room, Jake sat quietly with the fixed bot in his lap, unaware that his arrival was more than just a surprise to Lena, unaware that his presence here had already been noticed by people who didn't like change. But for now, inside their small apartment, two very different lives had started to share space, and neither Lena nor Jake knew just how much their meeting would change the world around them. Like the others, morning light entered the room softly as Lena opened her eyes and listened. The apartment was quiet, but she could hear distant humming from the kitchen, a slow, steady rhythm that meant Jake was already awake and probably cooking again. The scent of something warm and earthy filled the air, something that reminded her of fire and smoke and spices. Her own food was clean, cold, and mild, but Jake's meals had color, heat, and noise. She stepped out of her room and saw Jake standing by the stove in a plain shirt and pants. His hair still messy from sleep, he was stirring something in a pan while humming a strange earth song under his breath. He looked up as she entered, gave her a nod, and smiled. "Morning breakfast is almost ready. You want some?" Lena hesitated, just like every day before this. One part of her was curious, the other part scared of what the neighbors would think or say. She looked at the small bowl of thick red paste he was stirring and asked softly, "What is it?" Jake grinned a little. "It's eggs and peppers with a bit of earth spice, not dangerous. I promise it's good for mornings, keeps the body warm." She took a small spoonful, tried it carefully, and blinked. The taste was strange and sharp. Not painful, but deep and exciting. It felt like something alive had touched her tongue. She coughed once, surprised, then nodded slowly. "It's different, but not bad." Jake laughed and sat down with his plate, talking between bites about the docks, about the engines he had worked on, and the broken interface he helped repair on a small alien ship. Lena listened quietly, not used to such casual stories. But something in his voice made her want to keep listening. It was like Earth people talked in colors, while Ilari spoke in shadows. By the end of the week, the neighbors were no longer whispering. They were openly staring. When Jake walked through the hall, one old resident even stopped Lena near the stairwell and asked in a low, serious tone, "Are you safe with that human? Are you sure he won't cause trouble?" Lena forced a polite smile and nodded. But her hands were cold, and she felt their eyes all over her like silent questions she had no answers for back in the apartment. Jake seemed unaware of it all, or maybe he was just pretending not to care. He sang while fixing a loose tile in the bathroom and talked about making Earth-style dinner that night. Lena didn't have the heart to tell him about the warning she had received one evening as they sat by the window, looking at the lights of the city below. Jake said something that stayed in her mind for days. "I know I'm not really wanted here. I can feel it in the air. I'm not dumb, but it's better than the war zones, better than being treated like a tool back home. At least here I can breathe and try to live like a normal person, even if people look at me like I'm fire waiting to burn something." Lena didn't reply right away. Instead, she watched a small hovercraft drift across the sky, its lights blinking like a slow heartbeat. She thought about how her own people feared passion, how they avoided questions, and closed doors tightly. She wondered when she started feeling more comfortable around Jake than her own neighbors. The change became clearer one night when Jake fixed the building's water pipe quietly after it leaked into the common hall. Instead of calling the building manager and waiting days for help, he just found the tools and fixed it himself. The residents didn't thank him. They only looked away, muttering about humans being too bold and breaking rules. That weekend, Lena's older brother called her in a sharp voice full of concern. He spoke without pause, asking how she could allow a human in her home if their parents heard about this, if the university found out, she could lose everything. Ilari. Society valued calm, tradition, and safe order, and Jake was none of those things. Lena sat in her chair, listening and thinking about Jake humming in the kitchen, fixing broken machines, planting a tiny earth flower in the balcony box where nothing had grown before. She thought about the laughter, the energy, the honest way he faced the world, and she found herself saying softly, "He's not a danger, he's kind, and he's done more for this building than anyone else has." Her brother was silent for a moment, then said, "You've changed, Lena, you need to be careful." The call ended, but the words remained heavy in her mind and heart. The next day, a message arrived from the building council stating that there had been complaints about unauthorized residency and species conflict rules. Lena felt her breath catch as she read the formal tone. She was being asked to appear before the council for a discussion. She showed Jake the message that evening. His smile faded for a moment, but then he gave a small shrug and said, "I figured something like this might happen. I'm used to being the problem, even when I'm not." Lena looked at him then and saw more than just a human roommate. She saw someone alone in a place that didn't understand him. Someone who still tried to help, to heal, to fix what was broken, even when no one thanked him or wanted him around. "Do you want to leave?" she asked quietly, thinking maybe it was the safest path. Maybe it would protect him and her both. Jake looked out the window for a long second, then said, "No, not yet. I want to see how this ends." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She stood at her window and watched the stars, thinking about how strange life had become since Jake arrived, thinking about how silence used to be her friend, but now it felt empty. She missed his stories, his music, his chaos, and she realized that maybe she didn't want to go back to the life she had before. In the hallway outside their apartment, someone placed a small red note under the door. It read, "Final notice, species violation hearing scheduled inside the apartment." Jake was already making coffee for the next morning, unaware of the quiet storm building outside, but ready to face it when it came. Lena looked at the note, folded it and placed it in her pocket. She didn't tell him just yet. Instead, she helped him with breakfast and asked about earth flowers and how they grew, because deep inside her something was changing, and she knew this story was not over yet. The incident Morning began like any other. Soft winds touched the windows of the apartment, and the sun threw long golden rays across the buildings. Jake was fixing a small handheld device at the table while Lena cleaned the shelf nearby. Both of them moved in. Silence, not the awkward kind, but the kind that comes from comfort and quiet. Understanding. The air smelled like warm bread and metal polish. A strange mix, but now familiar. Lena had not yet told Jake about the warning note in her pocket. She wanted to, but every time she tried, the words stuck in her throat. She kept watching him, hoping for the right moment, but it never came. Instead, she tried to enjoy the days they had left before the hearing, before decisions were made that might tear apart the strange balance they had built together. Later that afternoon, as Jake stepped out to get supplies from the corner store, Lena sat by the window looking at the two small earth flowers blooming in the balcony box. She had watered them that morning, just like he had shown her. They were small but bright with colors she had never seen in Ilari plants, red and yellow mixed like flame. She smiled without realizing it, but her peace shattered seconds later when a loud cracking noise burst through the air, followed by a rising column of dark smoke. It came from the next building over, a tall one mostly used for storage and old files. People began screaming as emergency lights flashed across the district. The smoke rose fast and thick, choking the sky and sending shadows across the lake. Lena ran to the hallway, where other residents were already rushing down the stairs, fear on their faces. No one knew what caused it, but the fire was real and growing fast. Someone shouted that a power core had overloaded and the emergency bots were not responding fast enough. Jake was returning at the same time, carrying a small bag. When he saw the smoke, he dropped everything and ran toward the danger, not away, while others yelled at him to stop too. Stay back, to wait for rescue teams. He didn't listen. He only shouted back, I heard someone say there are kids inside on the 3rd floor. I'm not leaving them in there. Lena's heart pounded as she pushed through the crowd, trying to follow him. But the heat and smoke forced her back. She stood on the edge, eyes wide, as Jake disappeared into the black cloud, his outline swallowed by the building. She wanted to scream, but no sound came, only a sick feeling in her chest, like something important was breaking. Minutes felt like hours as the fire roared louder. Walls shook from small internal blasts and no one came out. The crowd grew thicker and whispers turned to panic. Some said he was lost. Others said he was foolish to go in. Some even muttered that humans always bring trouble, and now he had proven it. Then, just as the emergency bots arrived and began their slow, organized movements, a shape stumbled out of the smoke, covered in ash, coughing and dragging a small alien child in his arms. It was Jake, his clothes torn, his face burned in places, but his eyes alert and focused. The child was crying, but alive, holding onto his neck like a lifeline. Crowd went silent for a second, then loud with emotion. Some clapped, some shouted, others simply stared, but Jake did not stop to speak. He handed the child to a medic and dropped to his knees, breathing hard, eyes closed as pain took over his body. Lena reached him quickly, knelt beside him, and took his hand, feeling heat and trembling under her fingers. He opened one eye, saw her, and gave a tired smile. Thought, I'd get some fresh air, he whispered weakly, then passed out before he could say more. The next hours were a blur. Jake was taken to the clinic, treated for smoke damage and minor burns. The child's family came to thank him, but the news spread faster than anyone could expect. Articles appeared on the local net titled, Human Saves Ilari Child or Outsider, Shows Courage, and some headlines less kind called it Reckless Act by Alien Sympathizer. Lena stayed at his side while he rested, watching the door, waiting for someone to come question him or worse, but the clinic remained quiet. No guards, no officers, only the soft beeping of monitors and the slow rise and fall of his She felt something deep in her chest, not just worry, but pride and fear mixed together like fire and water. When Jake finally opened his eyes again, he looked around and asked, "Did they kick me out yet?" Lena shook her head and for the first time took his hand without hesitation. "No, and they won't, not while I'm here." He looked at her a bit surprised, but didn't speak, just nodded once and closed his eyes again. Later that evening, a message appeared on Lena's datapad from the council. It said the hearing was postponed due to recent events. No apology, no praise. Just cold words, but she knew what it meant. They were embarrassed. They wanted the attention to fade before making a decision. But outside in the streets, things were changing. Whispers grew louder, not all negative. Some people spoke of the human, with respect, with wonder. Some asked questions they had never dared before. Why would a human risk his life for a child, not his own? What kind of creature runs into fire for someone he has never met? Back in the apartment days later, Jake moved slowly, still healing, his arm bandaged. His voice rough but strong. He joked about cooking again and fixing the broken coffee machine. Lena sat nearby reading but not really focused. She kept glancing at him, watching his face, listening to his laugh. Something in her heart felt different. Now not just interest, not just curiosity. Something warmer, something that scared her more than the fire ever could. That night while they shared a quiet dinner under the soft balcony lights, Lena finally told him about the warning note, about the hearing, and what could still happen. Jake listened, nodded, and said calmly, "I understand if you want me to leave. I won't blame you." But she shook her head, looked at him clearly, and said, "No, I don't want you to leave. Not now, not after everything." Looked at her a long time, then smiled, small but real. Outside, the stars moved slowly across the sky, and the city below still whispered, but in a new tone, one that carried change in its breath and hope in its heart. Torn between two worlds, the news of the fire slowly faded from the public channels, but its shadow remained in every corner of the apartment building. Some residents who once whispered about the human now nodded politely when Jake passed. Others still looked away, holding on to old fears. The Alari were not a fast-changing people. They remembered everything, but rarely admitted when their views were wrong. Jake returned to his routine, though his steps were slower and his laughter a bit softer. His burns were healing, but the scars left behind carried more than just pain. They carried the weight of every stare, every silent judgment, and every cold moment when his kindness was returned with suspicion. Still he fixed the broken vent near the stairwell. Still he helped an old resident carry a heavy box to her room. Still he smiled, even when no one smiled back. Lena watched him closely, her feelings now a storm. Inside her chest she felt respect, deep care, and something else, something she wasn't ready to name. It frightened her how much she had changed since his arrival, how her quiet world now felt empty. Without his voice or his presence in the room, her fingers often reached for her datapad, checking messages again and again, as if waiting for another warning. But none came until one bright morning when the screen lit up with a single cold line: "Final hearing, confirmed your presence is required." She stared at the words for a long time. The message was from the Central Council, the group that governed their district and enforced all codes, including species regulations. Lena knew what this meant. She would have to stand in front of them and explain her choice. She would have to justify why she let a human stay in her apartment, why she ignored quiet warnings, why she believed one action during a fire was enough to erase the rules they had followed for generations. Jake was sitting on the floor fixing a power adapter when she walked in, her face pale, her hands shaking. He looked up and saw something was wrong. Without asking, he set the tool down and stood up. "What is it?" Lena handed him the datapad. He read the message in silence, then placed it gently on the table. "Well, "I guess it's time," he said softly. Lena sat down slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "They will ask me to choose. If I keep defending you, I lose my seat at the university. I lose my place on the housing list. Maybe even my job. They will not forgive this." Jake nodded. "I understand. You don't have to fight for me. I'll pack my things if that's what you want." She looked at him, angry and confused. "Why do you always do this? Why do you always expect to be thrown away?" "Because I usually am," he answered without emotion. But Lena heard the pain behind his calm tone. "I've been moved from place to place my whole life, on Earth and off, always temporary, always under watch. I don't expect to stay. I just try to leave things better before I go." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She walked the halls of the building, looking at every detail. The walls Jake had helped paint, the fixed door panels, the garden box on the balcony where the earth flowers now grew bright and tall. She remembered every moment since his arrival and realized she didn't want to go back to the life she had before. She didn't want quiet anymore. She wanted meaning. The next morning she dressed in her finest clothes. The long gray robe marked with her family symbol and a smooth crystal band on her wrist. She walked into the council chamber with her back straight and her eyes clear. The room was wide with silver walls and a round table at the center where 5 council members sat waiting, their faces calm but hard. One of them, an older Ilari woman with pale blue eyes, spoke first. "Lena of House Tanari, you stand here today in violation of District Species Code Line 12 subsection 5. Your choice to house an off-world human without proper approval is a matter of concern. Your position as student and resident is now in question. Do you have anything to say before we begin?" Judgment. Lena looked at them one by one, her voice steady. "I do then speak." She took a deep breath. "When I first met Jake, I expected trouble. I was afraid like many of you, but he showed me something I didn't know I was missing. Not just kindness, but purpose. He fixed what we left broken. He helped where we stayed silent. He risked his life for a child he had never met and asked for nothing in return." The older council member raised a hand. "Courage and fire does not erase centuries of order. One human cannot change our system." "No," Lena replied, "but one human can show us that maybe our system is not perfect. Maybe it needs to change." Another council member asked, "And you are willing to lose everything for this human?" "Yes," she said clearly. "I am." Silence filled the chamber. Then the oldest member, a quiet man who rarely spoke, leaned forward and said, "You are young, Lena of House Tanari. Your heart is loud, but your voice has weight. You may leave. Now we will discuss and decide." Lena left the room feeling like her legs might break from the pressure, but her chest was light. She had spoken the truth, and whatever the result, she would not regret it. When she returned home, Jake was packing his things again. A single bag on the floor. He looked up and smiled. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "I know," she replied, "but I wanted to." Stood still, unsure what to say, then slowly reached out and took her hand. For a moment, neither spoke, and everything around them faded into silence. Not the cold silence of fear, but the warm silence of understanding. The message from the council arrived 2 days later. It was short and full of complex words, but the meaning was clear. The charges were dropped. The hearing would not continue. No reward, no praise, just permission to remain, nothing more. But that was enough. Apartment felt brighter that evening. The city outside still moved with slow light, but something inside their small home had changed forever. The choice that changed everything. Weeks passed since the council hearing, and the city of Norelia slowly returned to its usual rhythm, quiet, orderly, and distant. But something inside Lena's apartment had changed forever. Jake still fixed broken things, but now he did it with music playing louder and laughter more frequent. Lena still kept her shelves neat, but now they were filled with strange little Earth items. A tiny music box, a hand-painted tool, and 2 books in a language she did not yet read. The flowers on the balcony had spread their colors across the railing, dancing in the wind, glowing gently at night. Neighbors still stared, but some had stopped whispering, a few even greeted Jake with quiet nods when they crossed paths. Others stayed cold, but the difference was clear. A shift had begun, even if small. One evening, while the sun dipped below the tall towers, Lena sat at the table watching Jake cook something new. It smelled like cinnamon and heat. She was smiling without knowing it, and her eyes followed every move. He made, the way his hands moved quickly, and the way he talked about Earth deserts and sandstorms and skyships. Turned and caught her staring. His smile grew wide, and he asked, "Too hot, too strong, too strange?" She shook her head. "Just different." They ate slowly, talking about little things, how long it took to boil water in low gravity, how strange it was that Alari chairs had no backs, how Jake still could not find decent Earth coffee in the city. They laughed more easily now, the silence between them soft and full, not empty or cold. After dinner, Jake stepped onto the balcony and looked at the sky. The 2 moons were rising, one silver, one red, lighting the city in colors that Earth never had. Lena joined him, standing close, but not touching. They watched the lights for a while, then Jake spoke without turning. "I've been thinking maybe I should go to the southern zones. I heard there's a mixed district there, humans, Alari, Fallon, even a few Drell. Maybe I'd fit better there." Lena felt her heart tighten and asked, "Do you want to leave?" Jake shrugged. "I don't know. I don't want to cause you more trouble. Some people still hate me being here, and I don't want them to turn on you." She turned to him and said clearly, "I don't care about them, not anymore. What matters is what we built here together." Jake looked at her finally, his eyes serious and warm. "So what do we do now? Stay and wait, or do something that matters?" Lena thought for a long moment, then replied, "I've been offered a chance to write for the Open Journal. It's not part of the university, it's free voice. I could write about you, about us, about the things no one wants to say out loud." Jake smiled. "I could teach kids, maybe show them how to fix machines, maybe help someone else who feels like they don't belong." They stood there in the cool air, the wind wrapping around them like a promise, and slowly, Jake reached out and held her hand for the first time, not as a guest or stranger, but as someone who had become part of her world. The days that followed were not perfect. There were still long stares, still rules that did not fit people like Jake. But the apartment became a place of change. People began to visit, curious, quiet, asking questions. Small groups from different species started gathering to talk about the new things happening. A child Jake saved came by with her mother holding a flower. As thanks, Lena wrote her first article. It was called "The Human in My Hallway," and it spread faster than expected, picked up by a larger channel, and shared across the district. Some hated it, called her foolish. Others sent messages saying, "Thank you for saying what they could not say." Jake started teaching in a small workshop at the edge of the district. His students were mixed and wide-eyed, learning not just about tools, but about being brave enough to try something new. They called him teacher, even though he laughed and told them he had no papers, no degree, just hands and patience. One evening, while watching the city from the same old balcony, Lena said quietly, "I never planned any of this. I just needed a roommate." Jake laughed and replied, "Yeah, and I just needed a place to sleep." Funny how everything else happened. They looked at each other, and there was no need to say more. They had crossed fear, doubt, pain, and judgment, and what stood between them now was strong, not perfect, but real. A week later, they received an invite from a council member, unofficial, quiet, asking if they would speak at a new forum about mixed species living. Jake looked at it, then looked at Lena. "Do you want to go?" She nodded. "I think we should. Maybe someone will listen." Jake grinned, or maybe we'll get kicked out again. Lena smiled, maybe both. When they arrived at the forum, the room was full, more than expected. Some came to argue, some to support, but all came to listen. And as Jake stood beside her on that platform, under the lights and eyes of so many, she felt no fear, only pride. He spoke first, not with big words, but with truth. About loneliness, about being seen as a problem, about the fire and the choice to run in without thinking, not for glory, but because it was right then. Lena spoke about silence, about change, about how one unexpected human roommate became the spark that helped her find her own voice. The crowd did not clap at first, but when they left the stage, people followed to ask questions, to learn more, and that was enough. As the sun set that evening, Lena and Jake walked home slowly, side by side, tired, but smiling. When they reached their building, Jake stopped and looked up at the window where light glowed soft and steady. He turned to her and said, "Thank you for not choosing the easy path." She replied, "Thank you for knocking on my door." And together they stepped inside their home, no longer alien and human, no longer guest and host, just two people who chose each other in a world that was finally starting to listen.